Live from the European Parliament here in Strasbourg, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us tonight, and here's what we have coming up for you on the menu. Europe collapse back. Politicians turn on the UK in an emotional display over Brexit. Chalk checkers. Boris Johnson tries to woo Conservatives at the Tory conference in Birmingham. Stubb steps up. The former Finnish PM makes a play for president, vowing to unite Europe. EU uniformity, mostly male, almost all white. Does Brussels have a problem with diversity? And in tonight's Raw Moment, Donald Trump does his best Jean-Claude Juncker impression. It's time to meet our panel for tonight. We are joined by Maya Delebom. She covers the European Parliament for Politico. Maya, which of these stories are you looking at closely?
As a journalist, I'm following Alex Stubb's future nomination, if ever he's nominated. And, you know, it's part of this whole democracy game now. It's starting to be...
Absolutely. Few months ago before the...
6 months before...
Election.
An important election.
Absolutely. All right, and we are also joined tonight by Stephen Wolfe. He's a British independent MEP, formerly with UKIP. Stephen, which of these stories?
Oh, it's absolutely Boris Johnson. You talk about Stubb wanting to be the leader of Europe. You've got Boris Johnson, who wants to be the leader of the Conservative Party and the leader of Britain. And actually, I was in a taxi yesterday, and in that taxi driver was a second-generation Pakistani who said, I voted Labour all my life, but if Boris Johnson becomes the leader of the Conservative Party, I, for the first time ever, would vote for the Tories.
Very interesting. We will be talking more on that story, a lot more tonight on Raw Politics. But first, let's begin with our top story. A scathing rebuke today in Strasbourg. Here, one by one, European politicians stood and launched a seemingly coordinated attack against Jeremy Hunt and his controversial comments. Now, while talking about Brexit negotiations, the UK's Foreign Secretary compared leaving the EU to escaping a Soviet-era prison. MEPs from former Eastern Bloc nations found that comparison particularly offensive, and they made that clear this morning.
And now we experience a new level of populism when the Foreign Minister of Great Britain, Hunt,
comparing the European Union with the Soviet Union.
Previous time he was insulting his wife, but here he does something far more different.
Please, Mr. Hunt, show us the gulag.
He's insulting not us, but millions of ordinary citizens who have lived under Soviet rule for so long time.
Please show us the Stasi system in your country.
Colleagues, let me share the criticism on the irresponsible leadership in the United Kingdom.
Let he be reminded that the United Kingdom decided freely to join the European Union.
But in his case, I have to tell you that is not so abnormal, Manfred. He has once even confused Japan with China.
It also decided freely to hold a referendum on its membership, in which the citizens voted freely.
Qualche differenza con l'Unione Sovietica c'è, visto che l'Unione Sovietica ha provocato anche milioni di morti. Non credo che l'Unione Europea abbia provocato milioni di morti.
So Sikorski is right, Mr. Hunt. You should apologize for what you said.
That is, in fact, a point on which he has to apologize.
All right, so we heard over there, we heard from Udo Bullmann, Guy Verhofstadt, Philippe Lambert, Manfred Weber, and of course, Antonio Tajani. First, I'd like to go to you, Maya. When we see something like that, it's almost like UK bashing. I mean, understandably, the comments really hit a nerve here, but that kind of show of coming together, bashing the UK, isn't this the kind of behavior that people in the UK might be saying, oh, well, look at that, it's probably better off that we're out?
I think for them, it's more Brussels bashing. Like, if you listen to what they're saying, they were saying this morning, there's a feeling of wariness, of these MEPs are nervous about these, you know, these provocations that they feel are provocations from Jeremy Hunt, from Boris Johnson. And if you follow what they said, you know, you feel that there is, they've reached a point when you can't, you can't say this against the EU at some point. And also, I think Verhofstadt said that you can't really take hostage Brussels. I mean, you can't have a debate in Britain only bashing Brussels in some ways. And also I think what is a bit hard for them is to hear Jeremy Hunt talking about giving this criticism that I think is a real provocation, because it strikes a nerve when you compare the EU to the Soviet Union as something. It's very daring, and it's for a European citizen, it's not a very nice memory.
And this kind of, you can say, shocking language and analogy. I mean, I'd put this to you, Stephen. This is clearly provocation, and perhaps they're trying to stand out at the Conservative Party conference. But isn't this the kind of language that your former party might be kind of responsible for? Putting strong, provocative language out there. What do you think?
Absolutely, you're right. In the first sense, this is Jeremy setting out his stall to become the next leader of the Conservative Party. Because he's saying, now I am
But is that acceptable, that kind of language?
Well, let's say this is politics. This is the way that you need to get a message down to the people that are going to vote.
Regardless of whether it's offensive?
With respect to when I was in UKIP, actually, that was one of the areas that we actually clamped down on. We actually tried to say that we're not part of a European Union that is a Soviet Union. What we did say is that they have a kind of, sometimes a vision of controlling countries which looked like the Soviet Union, where you didn't allow countries to be totally free, but we never went that far. So he's putting a real big message, and Maya is right, absolutely, on this. You can have indignation, you can be upset, but what Jeremy is attacking is not the European people, he's not attacking the European countries, he's attacking the institution of the European Union. And that is the massive divide between Britain and the rest of Europe. You see the European Union as Europe.
Should he have probably chosen different language? I mean, this is just, provocation.
That was a very risky reference to make. Very risky, I think.
It's also a very strong message. It's a very strong message you have to learn about democracy. Because either, if you carry on that way, you could be seen by people to be like that. And the European Union has always championed the idea of being free. But you forced a referendum in France, you forced a referendum again in Holland, and you made the Irish vote again to kind of join on the European constitution. So what we're saying is, you don't allow democracy when you don't like it. Isn't that like those who are overridingly powerful, the elites telling us what to do? That is the kind of strong message that he's sending out.
I mean,
but you can avoid a historical reference that has created devastating effects.
Absolutely.
When you talk about the Soviet Union, you talk about something, people have memories, know what it means and what it meant. So it's a very risky
and in some
thing
way,
to say
takes
to
away
Europeans.
from the argument, because people will start focusing on that reference.
Absolutely.
Indeed.
But I've been here in this chamber when I've been a person that's advocated strong control of borders, making sure that terrorists are not in this country, which is exactly what the European Union is doing now. But 2 years ago, I would have been called a Nazi, I would have been called a xenophobe. So it's not like the European Union is not capable of using that language. If they don't want to use that language and don't want to have it, they shouldn't use it themselves.
Now, speaking of using language, to provoke and to get attention, let's say, Jeremy Hunt was one of them, but also we had Boris Johnson, the Conservative Party conference. On the fringes of that, we had a speech that was at least eagerly anticipated as anything in the main event. That was from the UK's former Foreign Secretary, poster boy of the Brexit referendum, Boris Johnson. Let's take a look at what he had to say about Brexit and the Prime Minister's Chequers deal.
It is a constitutional outrage. It's not taking back control, it's forfeiting control. And by the way, they know it in Brussels. Don't be fooled by the suggestion that the EU will ultimately reject these proposals. Because what they want above all is to demonstrate to any other country that might dream of following suit that you cannot leave the EU without suffering adverse political and economic consequences. And what the Chequers proposals show is that the United Kingdom, for all its power and might and network of influences around the world, for all its venerable parliamentary history, was unable ultimately to take back control. Do not believe that we can somehow get it wrong now, bodge it now and fix it later. Get out properly in a year or two. That is a total fantasy.
It's clearly he's auditioning for something there. You were there at the speech.
Yes.
I mean, what was the reaction?
Prime Ministerial.
Was it?
Prime Ministerial, without a doubt. We talked about Jeremy Hunt with cheap shots, in a way, towards that of the European Union. But here you had a man who has been in government and has clearly got a passion now to leave the European Union for Britain and understands how we can actually profit, not just ourselves as a nation, but he's setting out a stance where he is prime ministerial. He did so in clear language to make sure that the people understood that we want to take control, but he didn't denigrate, he didn't upset.
Yeah, but Theresa May said she called it a good show. A show is what she said it was.
Well, you see, that's where we're getting back into British politics. Of course, every part of politics is a show. Sitting here on this, in the stage today, in the studio, it's a show. We're entertaining, but we're also providing good information.
But he has had an image of, you know, having faux pas, making gaffes. I mean, this is Boris Johnson, and all of a sudden you think that would just suddenly change his image and become prime ministerial.
I think people don't understand the power of people like Boris to be able to reach out to the constituents where I grew up in the working class estates in the north of England, of people who were electricians and plumbers and workers' hairdressers who are doing the jobs in the coffee shops and the restaurants, to speak their language.
That doesn't necessarily mean he could do the job, does it? I mean, okay, Maya, I would like to ask you this question. If Boris Johnson is prime minister, how worried would Europe be? Would the EU be?
Oh, I think they would be very worried. I mean, if you listen to MEPs this morning at the plenary session, whether it was Jeremy Hunt's stances or Boris Johnson, it's, you know, they put these people in the same basket at some point, you know. They think Boris Johnson is very provocative, and even if people listen to what he says, and clearly the internal British debate is now always sort of imported in the European Parliament. Everybody talks about the, you know, the Tory conference, and everybody's following very closely whatever British politicians say here. But I think, you know, as I said, whether it's Hunt or Johnson, this is a provocation, and they will fight against this sort of Brussels bashing. And I think he lost credibility here, to be honest with you.
And if it were ever Boris Johnson, I mean, he already mentioned pushing back Brexit 6 months.
No, I think what he did is he recognised that we've already got this 2-year time frame in place. That's already there. And he's now saying, look, Chequers is dead. We should chuck Chequers. And I agree with him wholeheartedly. It is not a deal that the European Union wants. It's not a deal that the Conservative Party or the Labour Party wants. And it's certainly not a deal what the members of the Conservatives or the public wants. So we should chuck Chequers and move on to a free trade arrangement, the Canada option that Barnier in this chamber actually talked to me about 3 weeks ago. So we've got that option. And he is basically setting out that, OK, we've got to start again, but we have this 2-year time period.
OK, very quickly.
I think the extension of Article 50 is totally impossible. Absolutely. I mean, they said it very clearly, so... Yeah,
I just like very quick name. Next British Prime Minister.
I think it'd be Boris Johnson.
And Maya?
Jeremy Hunt.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Well, let's move on now, because we want to talk about global leadership. A new survey is out ranking 5 world leaders, and Europe tops the results. That's today's Power Play. Leading the way in torrid times, Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron get top marks in a new survey by the Pew Research Center. 26,000 people were polled in 25 countries, and they have the most confidence in Merkel and Macron to do the right thing in world affairs. The poll will make tough reading for Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, though. A majority of respondents have no confidence in their global leadership. But they're not at the bottom of the class. Donald Trump takes that spot with just 27% expressing belief in his abilities. However, there is a shred of good news for the US president. His rating in the UK has risen slightly this year, visiting the Queen for afternoon tea, perhaps boosting his credentials in Britain. I mean, is that surprising? Macron and Merkel, their ratings are going down here at home, and yet their global popularity is up. What's your take?
Absolutely, I'm astonished.
Are you surprised?
Not necessarily with Merkel, because I think she is actually on the world stage as seen as a steady hand and very calm. But with Macron, with his poll numbering plummeting in France, and actually even here in this chamber when I talk to people, they're actually not a great fan of his. So I am really genuinely astonished.
All right, and you're surprised as well?
No, I'm not, to be honest. Merkel has been a very sort of solid, steady, as you said, figure in the political scene in Europe. Macron is still sort of the rising star. I think even if his polling rating are, dropping in France, I think he's still, seen as a as a person,
glamour
a hopeful,
boy
the glamour boy of the EU.
All right. Thank you for that. Well, we have a lot more coming up for you on the program as another candidate announces his bid to become Commission President. We'll take a look at the state of diversity in the corridors of European power. Plus, Italy's budget clash, comparisons to Greece, and accusations of fiscal terrorism. That's still ahead. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Another candidate has thrown his hat in the ring to replace Jean-Claude Juncker. Former Finnish Prime Minister Alexander Stubb put his name forward for EPP Spitzenkandidat today. And our political editor Darren McCaffrey spent some time with him earlier. Darren, tell us about that.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that he is somewhat the underdog when it comes to this EPP candidacy. It's going to be decided next month. It's clear, though, that he has got a campaign behind him. As you said, I caught up with him earlier on today, and I started by asking him about his pitch. Why did he want to take on this job? And about whether he was able or will be able to bridge that gap between the East and the West that he seems to argue has opened up. Let's have a watch. You've talked about trying to bridge these gaps between the East and West, the North and South, and you've talked about how Europe's ideological DNA is based on respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law and human rights. Do you think that's Viktor Orban's DNA?
Well, I don't know about Viktor Orban's DNA. I haven't been studying it, but I think it's a European DNA. I mean, basically, if we don't have values and if we don't stick to them, we have nothing. Remember, the European Union is not an ideological construct of left and right. It's based on values, common values, and they're engraved in Article 2. And my worry is that those values are being attacked, both from the outside, Donald Trump, China, Russia, from the inside, countries such as Poland, Italy, perhaps Hungary, and also from inside the EPP, with the likes of Viktor Orban.
The point of this, if he doesn't share those values, and Marine Le Pen doesn't either, and the Justin Law Party in Poland doesn't. Why is there a view? Why is there a view of what Europe is and what it should be any less valid than yours?
Probably not less valid, but we're still in a rules-based union. So basically you have common institutions, common values and common laws, and you have to abide by those. And obviously if you violate those, there has to be consequences. Now, I think we pro-Europeans, international liberals, whatever you want to call us, we need to listen to the sound of populism, because, there are things that have gone wrong in Europe. We haven't done well on migration. We're not necessarily very good at this transition to the technological revolution. We should be better on labor issues, etc., etc. So let's listen what these type of people have to say, and then let's try to sort it out. But my point is that in the EPP family, you have a set of values and you have to stick to them. In the European Union, you have a set of values and you have to stick to them. That's the most important thing.
But isn't the problem with populism, from your point of view, that it's actually quite popular?
Well, yes and no. Depends on how you measure it. You always have to compare it to something else. And there's no magic potion to deal with it. In Finland, we took the True Finns into government in 2015. Their popularity rate at the time was 18. Once they came into office and we did austerity measures, we bailed out Greece, and we had the biggest migratory crisis since World War II, their popularity halved. So basically what happens is that when you come into power, usually that power does not do good for your popularity, but there's no magic potion.
Should Jeremy Hunt apologise for the comments he made at the weekend?
I find his comments repugnant, to be quite honest. I think they're ahistorical. And for anyone to compare the European Union with the Soviet Union, which, after all, I would argue, was the source of a lot of misery, deaths of millions of people, it just didn't make sense to me. We've had a couple of these types of comments in Finland, and I've always reacted quite strongly to them. Again, in today's world, we live in different types of apologize this, apologize that. I just think it was a stupid thing to say.
Just finally, you are pitching yourself to become the new EU Commission President, or the EPP candidate for that. When was the last time that a white middle-aged man was not the EU Commission President.
I don't think that's it's always been the case. What middle age, yes, but I'd still hope that I can be a little bit a pitch for the next generation of Europe, in the sense that I don't know who the youngest Commission President has been. But
isn't part of the problem here, though, about diversity? You know, 99% of this Parliament is white. It does not reflect Europe. In some ways, it never has. And that's the problem. Does Europe need another person who has always looked like a white middle-aged man? Does Europe need that again?
Well, there's not much I can do about my looks, to be honest, and I probably won't. But I will say this, that I do think that we need more diversity also in the look of Europe. And that is, if I become Commission President, remember this is a long haul. It's a one-year race, basically, all in all. I will make sure that, for instance, there will be more women as European commissioners. I think in the Barroso Commission it was about a fifth. In a Juncker Commission, about a third. I'd like to push it, ideally, to about 40%, because that at least gives a little bit better of a picture of Europe. When I was Prime Minister in Finland, over half of the government were women, and I was proud of that.
And what just on, because it is really notable on race, how unreflective the European institutions, the Parliament is on race. Surely more should be done there as well.
Yeah, I think democracy should speak, and we should see different types of variety inside the European Union. I would certainly welcome that.
All right, well, we will be talking about diversity a little later on in the program, but first we'll talk about the East-West divide. And joining us is, of course, our political editor, Darren. And also with us for this discussion is Renate Weber, a Romanian MEP with the Alliance for Liberals and Democrats. Renate, I'll go to you. I mean, you are from Romania. We're talking about the East-West divide. And tomorrow there's going to be a debate on the rule of law in Romania. There's been a lot of attention from the EU looking at misbehaving countries, so to speak. Do you think this kind of getting the eastern countries in line going to make things worse?
Look, I prefer to speak about differences rather than division, because if we speak about division, then really the message that we sent about the European Union, I think it's going to be a very bad message. So, of course, there are differences, but I think that what is important, and I didn't hear the candidate, Alexander Stubb, talking about, is the determination to overcome the double standards that still exist in the European Union. Because we have talking, since we talked tomorrow now about Romania and the rule of law. But we have been asking as the Parliament for a mechanism that would apply to all the countries in the European Union. So every time when something wrong happens, then we can talk about this. Okay, that is still not in place.
So what kind of double standard are you talking about?
Well, there have been other countries where also there were shortcomings regarding to the rule of law, to the independence of the judiciary, and I never heard debates in the European Parliament.
Name some names. Give us some names.
Give us some names.
Exactly. What about Italy? I mean, I would say that this is a blunt example, but there were also others. Let me put it this way, not maybe on a big scale, but definitely there was. And I think that this is important, to keep these differences sort of under control, in the sense of working together to having a more harmonized European Union. What I would, first of all, I welcome the fact that there is a competition within the EPP. Competition is always good, and there were a few things that Mr. Stubb said that I really liked, particularly in the letter that he sent. But at the same time, he definitely must think of how to reform the European Union, because the Juncker Commission has failed beautifully.
So do the eastern countries feel punished by the EU? Is that the right word to use?
Well, you know, every time when we see a double language, a double standard, there is this feeling, a frustration feeling. And I would definitely not want to see these transforming into Euroscepticism.
All right. Thank you for your contribution there. We have next in our story, Alexander Stubb, as we were talking about earlier. He's just put in his bid to be the latest candidate to become Commission President. But when you take a closer look, you'll see that most have a lot in common. 8 people have put their names forward in the race to become lead candidate in their parties, including the EPP's other candidate, Manfred Weber, Jan Zahradil for the ECR, and Maroš Šefčovič for the S&D Group. The Greens have also put 4 names forward. The list of contenders follows a long-established pattern in EU leadership positions, a lack of diversity. This wall in the Commission in Brussels showcases past presidents. All 12 are white. All are men. It's not just the Commission. The European Parliament has had 29 presidents, all white, and only 2 women. And for more on this discussion, I'm joined by Maya de la Baume, who covers European Parliament and affairs for Politico, and Sajid Karim, a British MEP with a group of European conservatives and reformists. Sajid, I'll start with you. I mean, we're talking about diversity, and this place is all about uniformity. Does that bother you?
Well, the phrase pale, male and stale comes to mind when I watch that sort of a clip, because clearly the lack of proper representation of the European Union, the European Parliament and the institutions as properly reflective of the European Union as a whole, there's a long, long way to go. And actually I see regression rather than progression in that regard. Following on from the last set of European elections, if you look, you actually see in the chamber behind us 40-odd extremist far-right MEPs, less than half that number from non-white backgrounds. Within the European Commission, less than 7% of employed people come from diverse backgrounds. I think there's a number of reasons for that, far too complex to go into very quickly, depending on the institution you're dealing with. But the question shouldn't be just why is that, it's what are we going to do about that?
Exactly. And Maya, because Politico has written a lot of articles on, Brussels being blind to diversity, isn't anyone here bothered by that?
I think there's a real issue with gender equality.
I mean, enough to do something about it.
There's a problem of gender equality, and generally institutions are aware of it and are trying to make efforts. But when it comes to diversity, it feels to me that there is no. I mean, it's a very complex issue, but they're not making a lot of efforts to make this place more diverse, and it's all the more shocking that the EU. Societies in general are diverse. I mean, I come from France. In France, society is diverse. So it should be reflected in the EU institutions.
Exactly. As Sajid was saying, it's all about representation, isn't it? What is the impact then on policy making, and on thinking when you have this kind of difference between lawmakers and population?
Well, first of all, you end up with a real sense of distance between the decision makers and the citizens, because the citizens see that this is not properly reflective of society as a whole. So it's not just people from diverse backgrounds who feel that, or people from, one of the two genders that's underrepresented here, but people generally get the view that actually this is not healthy for Europe. And certainly those looking at Europe from outside, when they see us preaching about equality, about diversity and making sure that our strength is our diversity, then they say, well, you are nothing but words. So all of these things play out in one way or another.
And I think one of the most diverse is your group, in fact, the ECR. So once the UK leaves, I think diversity is going to go down.
I would say if the UK leaves.
Okay. Yeah. Optimism there. That's one of the main stories, actually, that we've been covering tonight. The Brexit is the UK leaving, and we've been talking about never has Brussels been closely watching Birmingham, where the Conservative Party conference has been going on. We're going to cross back live there because we have Rachel Johnson joining us live. She is a broadcast journalist, novelist, and she is Boris Johnson's sister. Rachel, you have been following this very closely. You're a Remainer. What do you make? I mean, today, earlier in the show, we were talking about the strong words from the parliamentarians here against Jeremy Hunt's comments. What do you make of the growing hostility between the two sides?
To Mrs. May, sorry, because I lost your question. Was it about Jeremy Hunt's comments, Theresa May?
Yeah, Jeremy Hunt's comments today.
Jeremy Hunt. They were yesterday, I think, weren't they? When he compared to leaving the EU to trying to escape the Soviet Union, well, what we've seen is a sort of escalation of language as Brexit is reaching its crescendo. And politicians are using increasingly violent imagery, increasingly politicized imagery. They're using weaponized imagery to talk about what should be a bureaucratic, diplomatic, organised departure from the club. Instead, in order, I think, for the Tory party to get grassroots support for their plan, which is not popular neither with the right of the party, nor obviously with half of the country that voted to remain, they are trying to sort of exaggerate the drama. And I think Jeremy Hunt's comments were regrettable, they were inappropriate. He's been dressed down by several EU ambassadors. He's been dressed down by former permanent undersecretaries of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office here, which is, I think, unprecedented. So, and also it was felt very out of character for Jeremy Hunt, who's a sort of mild-mannered former health secretary. And I think that when cabinet ministers appear on the world stage, they have to be very careful what they say, because they're talking for Britain, they're talking for everyone here, but he didn't talk for me.
Indeed. I mean, the comments that Jeremy Hunt made, people were saying that this is because they were trying to stand out at the Conservative Party conference today. Boris Johnson made his speech trying to be prime ministerial. I want to ask you about Boris Johnson's speech today. Unfortunately, I think Rachel can't hear us. It's too bad.
You're going to have to relay the question because I can't hear your questions.
Oh, that's unfortunate. We have Rachel there at the Tory party conference in London.
Boris Johnson's speech.
Are we going with her?
What do you think of the speech by Boris?
Boris's speech. Yeah, Boris's speech came on the Tuesday of conference. Tomorrow, Wednesday, is supposedly the climax, the main event. Now, I fear for Theresa May that the thunder has somewhat been stolen by what was not a barnstorming speech, but a really solid analysis of why the Theresa May's Chequers deal does not cut the mustard as far as the Brexiters are concerned. It leaves them unable to say that leaving the EU will restore them control of borders, money and laws, because it's a high regulation deal, which means that we may have some freedom of movement curtailed, but essentially we are subject to EU regulation going forward, and that's all because of the Irish backstop. And he doesn't think that is an adequate response to the referendum result.
Thank you very much for that, Rachel Johnson there from talking to us from Birmingham. All right, we'll have a lot more for you on Raw Politics. We'll be back after a short break. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, Italy appears to be on a collision course with Brussels over its budget plan. Tensions reached boiling point when Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker said that Italy was heading for a financial crisis similar to that of Greece. Let's take a look.
Ich wünsche nicht, dass wir nach der schwierigsten Bewältigung der Griechenland-Krise alles tun, damit wir eine neue Griechenland, diesmal Italien-Krise, kriegen. Eine Krise hat gereicht, eine Krise war genug und wir müssen verhindern, dass Italien hier Sonderwege für sich in Anspruch nimmt. Die würden sie von allen in Anspruch genommen werden. Das Ende des Euros bedeuten würde. Insofern muss man streng und gerecht mit Italien umgehen.
Well, Juncker's comments enraged Rome, and Italy's Deputy Prime Minister Luigi Di Maio was quick to fire back. He said there are European institutions playing at bringing terrorism to the financial markets. His coalition partner, Matteo Salvini, also weighed into the war of words, saying, in Italy, nobody is buying the threats of Juncker, who is now comparing our country to Greece. Now, the final proposal will be submitted later this month to the EU, with the EU threatening punitive measures if Italy continues to defy the rules. Well, joining us to talk about this is Darren McCaffrey, our political correspondent here at Euronews, and also Brando Benifei, an Italian MEP with the group of Socialists and Democrats. Look, tough words. I'll start with you. Tough words between Italy and the EU. Is Italy tempting fate here? Is it pushing the EU towards a position it doesn't want it to be in?
Well, the truth is that we have seen from this new nationalist government that we have in Italy a lot of chaos. Today, the finance minister is not attending the ECOFIN and is back in Italy to try to solve the mess. Because the truth is, we got a lot of press, a lot of communication, press releases, but no number, no figure, no text on this financial program for next year. So we have seen a lot of very expensive proposals, and I think it's right for Italy and its government to make its own plans and to propose that to Europe. But at the moment, there is really nothing substantial.
You agree with Italy?
No, I don't agree with. No, I don't agree with what has been proposed because it's clearly just they put together flat tax rate with income for everyone. It's like it's just propaganda. But I think it's the right for every government to push its own program, especially if it has a lot of support. But today, this government also has to consider that it has to comply with EU rules and agreements, and also it has to show something.
But that's exactly what it doesn't want to do. Italy does not want to comply. I mean, it doesn't want to.
Let's not talk about Italy. It's the present government. And I think that today, while we are talking, they are trying to find some solution and try to write something down, because as I said, they
have said they won't give an inch on this 2.4%.
We will see about that. My bet is that this could change also.
I think first of all, I think the EU is slightly frustrated about this, unsurprisingly, given the fact that they thought they had agreed to 1.6%, and clearly that has changed, and there is a massive tussle within the Italian coalition government about this. But ultimately, this was a coalition elected to invest in public infrastructure, to cut taxes, for the poorest Italians. And in that essence, that means, since the economy is not growing as well as people would want it to, it means more debt.
But they are not doing that. They're not doing that. They were elected to do that, but they just propose subsidies. They are not putting any money in investments, at least in what they announced, because we don't have anything in written. It's just propaganda. But what they announced is no real investment. Think of Genoa disaster that everyone knows. There is a very, very thin set of measures. They are not even asking the EU Commission to start the procedure to create a special economic zone for Genoa. They are doing very little. They just want to please some of their voters, but there is no investment and no real.
I just say that Europe does need to be careful here. We know how toxic and difficult Greece was. Just the internal narrative to make and such strong comparisons is
this collision course, between Italy and Brussels, the EU, being very closely watched. All right, we'll have to move on because now an anti-racism poetry contest in Germany has resulted in allegations of racism against a 14-year-old girl, and her mother, who happens to be a member of the far-right AfD party, was defending her. Alex Morgan and theCUBE are tracking the reaction to this story tonight. Alex.
Tesa, the event was called Speyer, a city without racism, a city with courage. Well, needless to say, things weren't quite that easy. Let's just show you a statement from the organisers who accuse Ida, who is 14 years old, of delivering a speech with terms which are derogatory towards people who are black, people who are gypsies, and other minority groups in German society. They say because of the nature of the event, they were not able to allow her into the final. She was disqualified, and that's despite reports that they even acknowledge here that there's there was some applause for her, some loud applause. Now, needless to say, this has been a very controversial thing, and our German team here in theCUBE have come in and listened to the video clips that do exist. The sound's a bit poor on those, but there are some key features of this poem, which, needless to say, really goes in for Angela Merkel and Germany's multicultural policies. Now, just showing you this, I don't know how your Latin is, but this is the original Latin of the Ave Maria, the Christian prayer. And what Ida did was change key sections into Latin, this time attacking the Chancellor and her policies. Here we go. Here we have the in red here. Originally it says about Mary, blessed art thou among women. She changes that to say, or blessed is Angela among the dictators, and ends her prayer by saying that we should be praying for Germany as the death of a nation. So there's a real sense this was an attack on Angela Merkel, attack on her policies, but also the event organisers saying there were derogatory terms about black people, gypsies and other groups. And just want to very quickly show you one thing from the other side, very important to get this in, and that is that Ida's mother saying that actually it's her and her daughter. They are the victims here, saying that anti-racist and Nazi graffiti was daubed on their house, and she's saying those people, they are the real Nazis who are trying to ban people from poetry contests and shut down discussion.
Right, thank you for that, Alex and the Cube team. I'll go to you because in Italy we're talking about divisive rhetoric as well. Just a quick comment.
Yeah, I can just say that Europe has to put its act together. My opinion is that the racism has been growing because we have been unable to tackle the big migration crisis happening in these years from a real European perspective. This has built a terrain for racism and contraposition between people
we see this in
a very easy way.
All right, thank you very much for that. Well, for now, it's time for tonight's Raw Moment. And if imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, Jean-Claude Juncker is a lucky man tonight. Take a look.
Jean-Claude, great business person, head of the European Union. Jean-Claude, my friend. I'd say, Jean-Claude, we want to make a deal. He goes, no, we are very happy. I said, you may be happy, but I'm not happy because we have one of the worst deals of any group. We have one of the worst deals with the European Union.
How would you characterize the relationship?
I think there's two things. First of all, how awful Donald Trump is at impressions. That's pretty clear. Second of all, Jean-Claude Juncker seems to have this weird relationship with people on the right, whether it be Nigel Farage, Donald Trump, even Viktor Orban to a degree. He's got this weird, I don't know, it's difficult to tell. They seem to quite like him.
They do, don't they? He's got this charm.
Like him. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And of course, thank you for watching us tonight on Raw Politics. Tell us what you're talking about. I'm on Twitter at Tesa Arcilla, or you can follow us on Twitter at Euronews and use the hashtag Raw Politics. Have a good evening and bye for now.